I watched my brother's face crumble as I looked straight through him, my expression politely blank. I'm sorry, do I know you? His hand, which had been reaching for me across the mahogany conference table, froze midair. Mia, this isn't funny. It's me, Daniel, your brother. I tilted my head, studying him with the clinical interest one might give a stranger on the subway. 28 years old, expensive suit, Rolex watch that cost more than most people's cars. Dark circles under his eyes that hadn't been there in my first life. I let the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable, then turned back to my lawyer. Mr. Chen, shall we continue with the transfer of assets? Mia, Daniel's voice cracked. Actually cracked. I'd never heard him sound like that before, not in 2 lifetimes. Please, I know I messed up, but you can't just pretend I don't exist. The thing was, I wasn't pretending. Not really. Because the brother I'd loved, the one I desperately wanted to notice me for 23 years, had never actually existed. That Daniel had been a fantasy I'd clung to while the real one forgot my birthday year after year, skipped my college graduation for a golf tournament, and didn't even show up to my funeral. Oh, yes, my funeral. That's where this whole thing started. Let me take you back 6 months. Not 6 months ago in this timeline, 6 months ago in my last life when I was dying in a hospital bed at 23 years old, completely alone. I'd been sick for weeks. What started as fatigue became something worse, something the doctors couldn't quite figure out until it was too late. Rare blood disorder, they finally said. Should have been caught earlier. Should have, could have, would have. I spent my final days staring at my phone, watching the battery drain as I waited for calls that never came. Daniel was in the middle of something important, according to his assistant. Mom was on a wellness retreat in Bali, finding herself, which apparently was more important than finding her daughter. Dad had a new family now. Hadn't spoken to me in 2 years, not since I'd refused to give his stepdaughter my college fund. I died on November 15th. My birthday was November 3rd. Daniel had forgotten it that year, too. When he finally showed up to the hospital, 3 days after I'd passed, he'd brought flowers. White lilies. I'd been allergic to lilies. He'd known that. Or he should have known that. But knowing things about me had never been his priority. The funeral was small. Daniel cried. He gave a beautiful eulogy about what a special soul I was, how close we'd been. He'd used the past tense, of course, because I was dead. But the truth was, he'd been using the past tense about me for years. I'd become past tense to my family long before my heart stopped beating. I remembered every word of that eulogy, even as I felt myself slipping away from the world. And then, I woke up, not in a hospital bed, not in heaven or hell, or any mystical in-between. I woke up in my childhood bedroom, in my parents' house, staring at a ceiling I hadn't seen in years. The glow-in-the-dark stars I'd put up when I was 12 were still there, though half had fallen off, just like before. My phone buzzed. I grabbed it with hands that felt too small, too smooth. The screen showed a date that made my heart stop. November 3rd, 15 years earlier. My 14th birthday. I was back. Somehow, impossibly, I was back. The memories of my previous life remained crystal clear. Every disappointment, every forgotten birthday, every time I'd convinced myself that this year would be different, that this year they'd remember, they'd care, and now I had a choice. I could try again, try harder, be better, be more noticeable, be impossible to forget. Or I could do something different. I laid in bed that morning, listening to the sounds of my family moving through the house. Mom's heels clicking on hardwood as she rushed to get ready for work. Dad's booming voice on a conference call, and Daniel, 16-year-old Daniel, blasting music from his room, probably getting ready to hang out with his friends. Not one of them knocked on my door, not one of them said happy birthday. Just like before, the neglect hadn't been dramatic in my first life. There was no Cinderella-style abuse, no evil stepmother locking me in towers. It was quieter than that, more insidious. A slow fade into invisibility. Daniel had been the golden child. Star athlete, straight A's, popular, handsome. Everything he touched turned to gold. Mom and Dad orbited around him like he was the sun, and I was the distant planet they'd forgotten they'd discovered. When I made honor roll, Dad said, "That's nice, honey," without looking up from Daniel's football highlights. When I won the regional science fair, Mom missed the ceremony because Daniel had a game. When I got into Princeton with a full scholarship, they threw Daniel a graduation party the same weekend, and I spent it setting up chairs. It wasn't that they hated me, they didn't. They just forgot I existed. I was the other child, the spare, the one who didn't need attention because I wasn't falling apart or failing out or demanding their focus. And I'd spent 23 years telling myself it was fine, that I was fine, that being forgotten was just the price of being low maintenance. But I wasn't fine. I died alone, unmourned until it was convenient, unloved until it was too late. And now I was back, and I had information they didn't have. I knew every important meeting that would make them miss my moments. I knew every girlfriend who would break Daniel's heart, every bad investment Dad would make, every fight Mom and Dad would have. I knew the future, and that meant I could change it, or I could let it happen exactly the same way with one crucial difference. This time I wouldn't care. That first day back, I tested my theory. I went downstairs at 7 a.m., same as I had in my first life. Mom was making breakfast, Daniel's favorite protein pancakes. Dad was reading the financial news. "Morning," I said. "Morning, sweetie," Mom replied automatically, not looking up. I waited. In my first life, I'd hovered around the kitchen, dropping hints, finally asking, "Do you know what today is?" The answer had been a distracted Thursday, and I'd gone to school crying. This time, I grabbed a granola bar and left. Didn't hover, didn't hint, didn't ask. At school, I joined clubs I'd never tried before, started sitting with different people at lunch, made plans that had nothing to do with being available in case my family finally noticed me. November 3rd came and went. No one said happy birthday. November 4th, I came home to find Daniel eating cake in the kitchen. "Oh, Mia," Mom said, looking up from her laptop. "There you are. Daniel got Student of the Month, so we got a cake to celebrate. Want a slice?" It was chocolate. I was allergic to chocolate. They'd known that, or they should have known that since I was 6. "No thanks," I said, and went to my room. An hour later, there was a knock on my door, Daniel holding a plate with a slice of vanilla cake that definitely hadn't been in the kitchen. "Hey," he said, looking awkward. "I remembered you can't have chocolate. Bought this separately. And sorry I forgot yesterday." My 14th birthday, he'd remembered. A day late with a grocery store cake slice, but he'd remembered. In my first life, I'd cried with gratitude, hugged him, told him it was okay, that it didn't matter. This time, I looked at him with the knowledge of a 23-year-old who died alone. "Forgot what?" I asked. He blinked. "Your birthday?" "Oh," I shrugged. "It's fine. I forgot it was important." That was the first lie, the first step, the first brick in the wall I was building between me and the family that had forgotten me to death. Over the next 9 years, I executed my plan with surgical precision. I didn't pull away dramatically. That would have made them notice, made them ask questions. Instead, I simply stopped trying, stopped hoping, stopped caring. When they forgot my 15th birthday, I didn't cry. I took myself to dinner with money I'd earned tutoring. When they missed my 16th because Daniel had a championship game, I went to the movies alone and loved every minute. When Dad asked me to skip my high school graduation to babysit his new stepdaughter, I said yes with a smile, then hired a babysitter and went to graduation anyway, sent him the bill. I got into Princeton again, same scholarship, same achievement. This time, I didn't tell them until after I'd accepted. Moved into my dorm while they were at Daniel's college orientation at a state school. "You're going to Princeton?" Mom had said on the phone, sounding genuinely shocked. "When did you apply?" "Last year," I said. "I mentioned it at dinner." "You did?" "Several times, but you were busy." That was the pattern. I stopped making my achievements available for them to ignore. Started living my life in the spaces they didn't see. And Daniel? Daniel kept trying. Every year he'd remember my birthday, sometimes a day late, sometimes a week late, but he'd remember. He'd show up with gifts, with apologies, with promises to do better, I accepted them all graciously, thanked him politely, and gave absolutely nothing back. No late-night sibling talks. No asking for advice. No sharing my dreams or fears or plans. When he tried to bond, I was pleasant but distant, like a coworker you liked well enough but would never see outside of work. "You've changed," he said once during my junior year of college. He'd driven 3 hours to take me to birthday dinner, on the actual day for once. "Have I?" I said, cutting my steak with precise movements. "How so?" "You're just different. Harder to read. We used to be close." I looked at him then, really looked at him. 25 years old, successful, handsome, genuinely confused about why his little sister wasn't falling over herself to maintain a relationship he'd spent years neglecting. "When were we close, Daniel?" He'd had no answer to that. The thing about foreknowledge is that it's not just about knowing what will happen. It's about knowing what won't happen if you don't make it happen. In my first life, I'd fought for every scrap of my family's attention, arranged my schedule around their availability, compromised my dreams to stay close to them. This time, I chose myself. Every single time, I graduated summa cum laude, started a business with my roommate, a tech consulting firm that I knew would explode because I'd seen the market trends. By 23, the age I'd died before, I was a millionaire. And my family, they'd barely noticed I existed. Until the will reading, Grandmother Chen, my maternal grandmother, had been the only one who remembered. Every birthday, every achievement, every moment that mattered. She'd been there in my first life, and she'd been there in this one. The difference was that this time, I'd actually spent time with her. Real time. Not duty visits, but genuine relationship. I'd learned Mandarin to speak with her more easily, learned to make her favorite dumplings, listened to her stories about surviving the Cultural Revolution, about building a business from nothing, about losing and finding herself over 9 decades of life. "You're different from them," she'd told me once during my sophomore year of college. We were in her penthouse apartment, looking out over the city. "You have steel in your spine. They have water." "Is that good or bad?" I'd asked. "It's powerful," she'd said. "Use it wisely." She died last month, 97 years old, sharp until the end. I'd been holding her hand when she passed, reading her poetry in Mandarin. Daniel had been in the Maldives with his girlfriend. Mom had been at a spa. Dad had sent flowers. And now, here we were, in a lawyer's office, about to read the will of a woman worth approximately $800 million. I knew what was in the will. I'd helped her write it. Mr. Chen, her lawyer, no relation, cleared his throat. "Thank you all for coming. Mrs. Chen's will is quite straightforward, but there are some specific provisions she wanted me to explain." Mom and Dad sat forward. They'd been polite to Grandma Chen, but never close. She'd been traditional, difficult, too demanding. She'd also been brilliant, hilarious, and the only one who'd ever made me feel seen. Daniel kept glancing at me. I kept looking at Mr. Chen. "To her daughter, Jennifer Chen Rodriguez, she leaves her jewelry collection and a sum of $1 million. Mom gasped. Dad squeezed her hand. To her son-in-law, Michael Rodriguez, she leaves her art collection and a sum of $500,000. Dad's eyes went wide. To her grandson, Daniel Rodriguez, she leaves her property in Monterey and a sum of $2 million. Daniel looked like he might fall out of his chair. And to her granddaughter, Mia Rodriguez. Mr. Chen paused, looking at me over his glasses. I kept my expression neutral. She leaves the remainder of her estate, approximately $790 million, including her business holdings, real estate portfolio, and controlling shares in Chen Industries. The silence was deafening. "What?" Mom finally said. "There must be some mistake," Dad added. Daniel just stared at me. Mr. Chen continued reading. Mrs. Chen included a letter to be read at this time. He opened an envelope, and I heard Grandma's voice in every word. "To my family. I have watched you all for many years. I have seen who shows up and who makes excuses. I have seen who builds relationships and who expects them to exist through proximity and blood alone. I have seen who remembers and who forgets. My granddaughter Mia has been the only one to truly know me in my final years. She learned my language. She learned my history. She showed up, week after week, year after year, not because she wanted something from me, but because she valued me as a person. This is not a punishment to the rest of you. This is a reward to the one who earned it. Mia, my dear girl, you have a spine of steel. Build something worthy with it. Mr. Chen folded the letter. There's one additional provision. Mrs. Chen has left instructions for a trust to be established in Daniel Rodriguez's name. Daniel perked up. To be managed by Mia Rodriguez, distributing funds at her discretion for Daniel's use, provided he meets certain conditions outlined in the trust documents. What conditions? Daniel asked, his voice hoarse. Mr. Chen looked at me. I nodded. The primary condition is that he maintain a meaningful relationship with his sister, as defined by specific, measurable criteria including but not limited to remembering important dates, attending important events, and regular communication. Failure to meet these conditions results in the trust reverting entirely to Mia's control. I watched my brother's face cycle through emotions. Shock, confusion, hurt, and finally, something like understanding. This is ridiculous, Mom said. You can't put conditions on family relationships. Mrs. Chen could and did, Mr. Chen replied calmly. The will is ironclad. I drafted it myself. Dad turned to me. Mia, surely you'll contest this. This isn't right. Family should share. Share what? I asked, speaking for the first time since the reading began. My voice was level, calm. Share what, Dad? The way you shared your time. The way you shared your attention. Should I share Grandma's estate the way you shared my childhood? His face went pale. Mia, Mom started. I'm not contesting anything, I said, standing. Mr. Chen, please proceed with the transfer of assets and prepare the trust documents for Daniel. I'll review them next week. Mia, wait. Daniel was on his feet. Can we talk, please? I looked at him, really looked at him for the first time that day. About what, Daniel? About all of this? About us? About... He ran his hand through his hair, a nervous gesture I remembered from both lifetimes. I know I wasn't the best brother. I know I forgot a lot of things, but I was trying these last few years. I was showing up. Were you? I interrupted. Were you showing up for me, Daniel? Or were you showing up because you felt guilty? He flinched. Let me ask you something, I continued. What's my favorite color? He opened his mouth, closed it. Blue? What do I do for a living? You're in tech. Software? Where did I go to college? Some Ivy League school, Harvard? When is my birthday, Daniel? This one, he knew. November 3rd. And how many of my birthdays have you actually remembered on November 3rd? Not November 4th. Not November 10th when guilt kicks in. November 3rd. He stared at me, and I watched him do the math in his head. Watched him realize that even though he'd tried, he'd still failed far more often than he'd succeeded. His voice cracked again. I don't know you anymore, do I? Did you ever? I asked quietly. And that's when it happened. That's when I saw it. The exact moment my brother realized he'd lost something he never knew he'd had. His face crumpled, actually crumpled, like paper being crushed. Please, he whispered, I don't want to lose you. You can't lose what you never held on to, I said. Then I walked out. The next 3 months were a whirlwind. Taking over Grandma's business empire was no small feat, even with foreknowledge of market trends. I'd known it would be huge, but actually sitting in her office, signing documents that controlled thousands of jobs and millions of dollars, that was different. Mom and Dad tried reaching out, texts, calls, emails, hurt messages about how I was tearing the family apart and turning my back on them. I responded to every single one with the same message. I'm not turning my back on anyone. I'm just facing forward for once. Daniel was relentless. He showed up at my office every week. Brought coffee, the right order, oat milk latte with vanilla, which he'd apparently learned. Sent flowers on the 1st of every month. Not lilies, never lilies. Peonies, which were actually my favorite. He was trying, really trying, the way he'd never tried before. And I let him fail, not cruelly, not dramatically. I was polite, professional. Thanked him for the coffee, appreciated the flowers, but I didn't let him in. Didn't give him the absolution he was seeking. I'm going to keep trying, he said one day, standing in my office doorway. It was raining outside, and he was soaked because he'd apparently run from his car without an umbrella. I know I don't deserve another chance. I know I've had 1,000 chances and wasted them all, but I'm not giving up. Why? I asked, genuinely curious. Why now, Daniel? Why does it matter now? He was quiet for a long moment. Then, because I read Grandma's letter, really read it, and I realized she was right. I didn't know you. I didn't value you. I just assumed you'd always be there, like furniture, like wallpaper. And now you're not, and His voice broke. I miss you. I miss someone I never actually knew, which is insane, but it's true. That's not love, I said softly. That's loss aversion. You're upset because you lost access to something, not because you value what you lost. No. He shook his head violently. No, it's more than that. I've been thinking about all the times you were there and I didn't see you. Your high school graduation that I missed because I was hungover. Your college acceptance that I barely acknowledged. That time you won that huge award and I was late to the ceremony because I was playing video games. I didn't just forget your birthday, Mia. I forgot you. And I can't live with that. I studied him. 28 years old, successful in his own right now. He'd turned his college partying into a successful event planning business. But still the golden child. Still the one who'd had everything handed to him. Except me. He'd never had me, not really. Do you know what the worst part was? I asked. It wasn't that you forgot. It was that you didn't think forgetting mattered. Every time I told you it hurt, you'd say, it's just a birthday, or it's just a graduation, or it's just dinner. Like the things that mattered to me were inherently less important than the things that mattered to you. I was wrong, he said immediately. I was so fucking wrong, Mia. Yes, I agreed. You were... Can I fix this? Tell me how to fix this. I thought about the trust Grandma had set up, the conditions she'd put in place, remembering important dates, attending important events, regular communication. You want to fix this? I asked. He nodded desperately. Then start by telling me my middle name. He froze. Your middle name? Yes. What's my middle name, Daniel? I watched him search his memory, watched panic flash across his face. Is it Marie? No. Elizabeth? No. He looked like he might cry. I don't know. It's May, I said. After Grandma, I've had it my entire life. You've seen it on legal documents, on birthday cards, on my college diploma that I know you glanced at once. And you don't know it. I'm sorry. Don't apologize, I interrupted. Just understand. You don't get to know me now because you've realized I'm worth knowing. You don't get to claim a relationship we never had because losing it makes you uncomfortable. And you definitely don't get to cry about forgetting my name when you've spent our entire lives forgetting me. I stood up, walked to the door, held it open. I have a meeting. You should go. He didn't move for a long moment. Then, quietly, when's your birthday this year? Why does it matter? Because I want to be there. I want to celebrate you. I want to start remembering. I looked at him, this brother I'd loved so desperately in my first life. This person I'd died wanting to matter to. November 3rd, I said. Same as always. I'll be there, he promised. We'll see, I replied, and closed the door. November 3rd came 6 months after the will reading, 23 years after I'd been reborn, 37 years after I'd originally been born. I was 23 years old again, the age I'd died at before. I spent the morning doing exactly what I wanted, slept in, made myself an elaborate breakfast, went to my favorite art museum, had lunch at the restaurant where Grandma and I used to eat dumplings. No one knew where I was. I'd told my assistant to clear my schedule, turned off my phone, disappeared into the city. It was perfect. At 7 p.m., I returned to my penthouse apartment, Grandma's apartment, now mine. The doorman smiled at me, handed me a package. This arrived for you this morning, Miss Rodriguez. Inside was a handwritten card from Daniel. Mia, I know you probably don't want to see me today. I know I've burned every bridge and broken every promise, but I wanted you to know I remember, November 3rd, your birthday, the day the world got Mia May Rodriguez, and I got the greatest gift I never appreciated. I'm not asking to celebrate with you. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm just asking you to know I remember. Happy birthday, your brother Daniel. Inside the package was a book, old, leather-bound, written in Mandarin. I recognized it immediately. It was Grandma's favorite book of poetry, the one I used to read to her. I sat with it for a long time, reading poems about memory and loss and the things we carry. At 8 p.m., there was a knock on my door. I considered not answering. Then, curious despite myself, I looked through the peephole. Daniel stood there holding a small box. No flowers, no grand gesture, just him and a box. I opened the door. "I know you said," he started. "Come in," I said. He looked shocked, but stepped inside carefully like he was entering a temple. "I wasn't sure you'd be here," he admitted. "Where else would I be?" "I don't know. I've never actually known where you'd be because I never paid attention." He held out the box. "This is for you." Inside was a locket, old, gold, delicate. I recognized it. "This was Grandma's," I said. "She gave it to me before she died," Daniel said quietly. "Told me to give it to you on your 23rd birthday. Said you'd understand why when the time came." I opened the locket. Inside was a photo I'd never seen before. Grandma, young, standing with a little girl who looked exactly like me. On the other side was an inscription in Mandarin. "Memory is a choice." "She told me something else," Daniel continued. "She said that forgetting isn't the absence of memory, it's the absence of care. And that remembering isn't about having perfect recall. It's about deciding someone matters enough to keep in your mind." I closed the locket, felt its weight in my palm. "I've been doing research," he said. "About you. About things I should have always known. Your favorite color is green, not blue. You're the CEO of Chen Industries now, not just in tech. You went to Princeton, graduated summa cum laude, started a consulting firm that's revolutionizing the industry. You speak Mandarin fluently. You volunteer at the Children's Hospital every Sunday. You hate chocolate but love vanilla. You're allergic to lilies. His voice cracked. "You're incredible, and I've missed all of it." "Yes," I said simply. "You have." "I can't get those years back," he said. "I can't undo the damage. But I want to be here for the years ahead. If you'll let me. Not because of Grandma's trust. Not because I feel guilty. But because you're my sister, and I want to know who you actually are." I looked at this man, my brother, standing in my apartment with tears in his eyes. In my first life, this moment had never come. He'd cried at my funeral, but I'd been dead. Too late for tears to matter. This time, I was alive. And I had a choice. "Do you know what happens if you fail to meet the conditions of Grandma's trust?" I asked. He nodded. "The money reverts to you." "And if that happens, will you still show up?" He met my eyes. "Yes." "Why?" "Because you're not a responsibility or an obligation or a condition of a trust," he said. "You're my sister, and I've spent our entire lives treating you like you don't matter. I can't fix the past, Mia. But I'm begging you for a chance to be part of your future." I thought about the girl I'd been. The one who'd died alone, forgotten, unmourned. I thought about the woman I'd become. The one with a spine of steel, who'd built an empire, who'd chosen herself over and over, and I thought about Grandma's words. Use it wisely. Power wasn't just about money or business or revenge. Power was about choosing who got access to you. Who got your time, your energy, your love. I'd spent 9 years punishing my family for their neglect, and they'd deserved it. Every ignored birthday, every forgotten moment, every time they'd chosen convenience over connection. But I'd also spent 9 years in a cage of my own making, locked behind walls I'd built to protect myself, unable to risk caring again. "I'm not your redemption arc," I said finally. "I'm not a prize you win by trying hard enough. I'm a person who spent our entire lives being invisible to you." "I know," he said. "If you want to be part of my life, you don't get to half-ass it," I continued. "No more forgotten birthdays. No more missed calls. No more treating my time like it matters less than yours." "I understand." "And you don't get to expect forgiveness," I added. "You can show up, you can try, you can build something new. But you don't get to demand that I feel a certain way about it." "I won't," he promised. I studied him for a long moment. Then I held up the locket. "Thank you for this. And for the book. And for remembering." Hope flickered in his eyes. "Does that mean?" "It means thank you," I said firmly. "That's all it means right now." He nodded, accepting that. Can I take you to dinner?" To celebrate your birthday properly? I thought about it. Thought about spending the evening with someone who'd spent decades forgetting I existed. Thought about giving him access to me after working so hard to cut him off. Thought about the fact that he'd shown up. Not tonight, I said. Tonight is mine, but I paused. You can take me to lunch tomorrow, if you want. His face transformed. Really? Bring the trust documents, I said. We should review them together. Of course. Yes, absolutely. He was backing toward the door like he was afraid I'd change my mind. Same place we had lunch that time? When you said I didn't know you? I blinked. He'd remembered that? You remember that conversation? I remember every conversation we've had in the last 9 years, he said quietly. I might not have understood them at the time, but I remember them now. You were telling me the truth over and over, and I wasn't listening. I'm listening now. He left, and I stood in my apartment, holding Grandma's locket. Memory is a choice. She was right. Daniel had chosen to forget me, over and over, until forgetting became habit. And now he was choosing to remember. Whether that choice would last, whether he'd prove himself worthy of the chance I was considering giving him, remained to be seen. But for the first time in 2 lifetimes, I felt like I had the power to decide. Not to hope they'd notice me, not to beg for attention, but to decide, on my terms, what kind of relationship we'd have, if any. I opened the book of poetry and found Grandma's favorite verse, the one about rivers carving through stone. It took time, it took patience, but eventually, even the hardest surfaces yielded to consistent pressure. Maybe Daniel would be consistent. Maybe he'd prove that this new attention was real, was lasting, was worth the risk of letting him in. Or maybe he'd fail, maybe he'd forget again. Maybe in 6 months or a year, he'd miss something important and I'd have my answer. Either way, I'd be fine. I'd built a life that didn't need his validation. I'd become someone who mattered, not because my family finally noticed me, but because I'd noticed myself. The next morning, I woke up to a text from Daniel, sent at exactly midnight. Happy birthday. 1 day late, but I'm counting it. Looking forward to lunch. I'll be there at noon. I promise. I smiled despite myself. He was trying, really trying. Whether it would be enough, whether he could transform from the brother who forgot me into someone worthy of knowing me, that was still an open question. But at least now it was my question to answer. At least now I held the power. Epilogue. 5 years later, I stood in the ballroom of the Chen Industries headquarters, looking out at 300 employees, investors, and journalists. We were launching a new initiative, a foundation in Grandma's name focused on helping young women in business. My grandmother taught me many things, I said into the microphone. But the most important was this. You teach people how to treat you, not with words, but with boundaries, not with demands, but with choices. I caught sight of Daniel in the crowd. He was here. Of course he was here. He'd been here for every major event in the last 5 years, every birthday, every business milestone, every moment that mattered. He'd earned his trust fund, not because he'd met some arbitrary conditions, but because he'd actually become my brother. Not the fantasy version I dreamed of in my first life, but something real. Complicated, imperfect, but real. We'd never be the siblings we might have been if he'd cared from the start. That version of our relationship had died with me in my first life, but we'd built something new, something based on mutual respect rather than assumed obligation. Mom and Dad were here too, sitting uncomfortably in the back. We had dinner once a month now, strained conversations where they tried to understand the daughter they'd never known. It wasn't warm, it wasn't easy, but it was honest. They'd lost the version of me that would have accepted crumbs. They were learning to know the version of me that demanded full meals. As for me, I was happy. Genuinely happy. I'd built an empire, changed an industry, made a difference. I had friends who showed up, employees who respected me, a life that mattered. And I had it because I'd chosen myself. Because I'd stopped waiting to be remembered and started being unforgettable. After the speech, Daniel found me backstage. That was incredible, he said. Grandma would have been proud. I know, I replied, and I did know. I felt her pride every day in the locket I wore, in the business I ran, in the life I'd built. Dinner tonight? He asked. To celebrate? I checked my phone. Can't. I have plans with friends. I saw the flash of disappointment quickly hidden. Old Daniel would have pushed, would have made it about him. New Daniel just nodded. Tomorrow, then? I smiled. Tomorrow works. As I watched him go, I thought about that girl in the hospital bed, dying alone, waiting for a family that never came. I thought about the choice I'd made to come back, to relive those years with eyes wide open. It had hurt. It had been lonely. It had required a strength I didn't know I had. But I'd do it again in a heartbeat. Because this time, when they finally showed up, when they finally remembered, I was the one who got to decide if it was too late. And that power, that choice, that control over my own story, that was worth more than all of Grandma's fortune combined. Memory is a choice, and I'd chosen to remember exactly who I was, what I deserved, and what I'd never accept again. Let them remember that.